Good evening, everyone. I just want to apologize for the delay in uploads. I unfortunately caught the flu, so I've just been sick all week, and obviously my voice has not gone back to 100%, so I didn't want to upload something that was lackluster. But I hope you enjoy this video that I made for you, and I appreciate all the love and support. I know this may sound crazy, but I figured this would be the best place to share my story. It was around 2015 or 2016. I remember it being in the summertime. The trees and brush was still full and lush. My wife and I live on 12 acres of land in Mount Juliet. The land was mostly wooded with maybe 3 acres around the home cleared out, with the exception of random spaced trees. 2 acres in the front yard and about 1 acre in the back. The house was built in 1969, and the state of the home was original down to the year, down to the shag carpet. We originally moved in back in 2014, and over the years of living there, we gradually worked on remodeling when we had the extra time and money. The land had 2 small barns on the property we turned into chicken coops. We also decided to add a sheep. A little bit of a side note, the home itself always had an unsettling feeling. The basement had a dark, evil feeling, with a freezer full of animal carcasses and a gallon bucket full of frozen blood that was there when we moved in. But that's another story within itself. So, over the span of living there, we had problems keeping our chickens alive. We couldn't find how something could be getting in. One day, we got home from grocery shopping in the early afternoon to find all of our chickens dead and spread across our backyard. It didn't make any sense. We had that heavy-duty hardware cloth wire caging that was torn like something clawed through it. We were concerned and weren't sure of what to do. After all, we had the sheep to worry about. I began setting out at night in different times of the day when I had the time. I thought maybe I could hunt whatever it was that was killing our animals, but nothing ever showed up. We kept a close eye on our sheep the best we could, making sure he was well protected. That was until one random morning, we go out to feed him and found him out of his stable, lying there in the backyard, not moving. We still don't know how he got out. He had no marks or explanation to what happened to him. The only thing coming to mind is a fear-induced heart attack. Now, into the sighting. Like I said, it was summertime. I had the windows open because our air conditioning wasn't working very well on the second floor and was just trying to get a breeze through the house. My wife was at work. Meanwhile, I'm working on putting our laundry away in our upstairs bedroom. I began hearing this deep growl sound and a slightly higher pitched growly sound with it. I couldn't tell what it was, so I stuck my head out the window to listen better. I could hear coming from the woods on the right side, slowly getting louder, slowly getting closer to being in view. As the sound drew near, my heartbeat sunk. I felt fear and dread. I was scared, but I wasn't sure why. That was until it came into the clearing. There it was, this giant werewolf walking across my front yard. It was walking on all fours, and it had a giant canine head, a large humped back, a long bushy tail, and its fur was thick on its chest and back and thinned out on its legs. Its joints bent like ours. As it walked, its back legs bent like our knees do, and its front legs bent how our elbows do. As it was walking into the front yard, I was able to measure it up by looking and walking past a tree. It was at least 5 feet standing on all fours to its shoulders, so I imagine it being 7 or 8 feet tall on its hind legs. The slightly higher pitch sound was coming from behind it. Following behind was an identical pup. I was in such shock I couldn't move, frozen in what I was witnessing. I didn't even think to try to photograph it. I guess in that moment, I didn't want to miss anything. It carried on across the yard, going deeper into the woods. I told my wife about it and I never saw it again after that day. Also, never went outside without protection after that. Help identifying entity attached to the woman on my mother's side of the family. So, as a precursor, my grandmother's home was originally a coal camp house. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, living room, and a kitchen. As a child, her father died in the mines he worked in and they got a large amount of money. They built onto the home. Many paranormal things have occurred here. The most troublesome thing that has continued occurring is the appearance of a toddler-sized entity. It does not look transparent or ghostly. It looks as real as me or you. It has bright red hair and a toddler-sized body. What's unsettling is that it has adult facial features. The first time I saw it was when I was just 14 and just encountering puberty. One day, I was sitting in my grandmother's living room and it was just me and her in the house. One of my peripheral vision, I saw it. It crawled from the edge of my vision, from behind my chair, and just crawled to the center of the room. It stopped in the center and turned its head to smile at me. Then it crawled into a hallway, and upon looking, it was nowhere to be found. Its occurrences follow this pattern. It never speaks, never crawls towards you, only away. It only happens if there are only women in the house. My grandmother's came into the room after I looked for where it went. I know I was sickly white. I cannot explain the feeling that came over me when this happened. I was frozen with pure terror, and my mind felt almost clouded with confusion. When she saw me, she said, "You finally saw it." She explained that all the women in the family see it every now and then and that it won't hurt me. She warned me to not approach it or speak to it when I see it. Just see it and then ignore it. According to her own mother saw it as well, as herself and my mother. I'm now 21 and don't know a lot about our family history, but I'm wondering if anyone has had experiences with entities of this kind. I know that our ancestry is largely Irish, but not much else. The thing only happens in her house, thank goodness. Any other information would be greatly appreciated. This happened in Tennessee. I was in 9th grade and it was during winter. I loved how cool it looked when the woods was covered in snow. But one day, when I went back into the woods, I was following this old 4-wheeler path. Then I saw this 2-legged thing. Its legs were inverted, and its body was very unproportional. Really wide, upper body with relatively normal but backward legs. My heart dropped, and I ran out of there and went back a couple hours later with my brother, and the tracks it left were just lines, like it was dragging its feet the entire way through the woods. The encounter took place about 4 years ago. Since learning about humanoids, and in particular about the rake, I was always very fascinated about them. Back in the good old days, one of my best friends, Robert, would come over for sleepovers. I introduced him to the rake. We always watched horror movies or videos of bizarre encounters, as we love to frighten ourselves before venturing out into the local woods. Till that night trip, we never encountered anything really creepy when venturing into the woods. Sometimes Robert would try to stand still in silence in hope of hearing something exciting. In order for you to get a better understanding of my thoughts later on, I want to give you a detailed explanation of our path. It was after midnight when we headed out. Shortly after entering the forest, there was a small crossing with a left path and a right path. We took the right path, walking up a hill for about a quarter of an hour. After that, we just pretty much followed the path, reaching the peak of the hill, and then ventured down again for about 10 minutes. We reached another crossing. The left path would lead us to another exit, whereas the straight path would lead us to continue walking on to another hill. About half an hour ago, going up the hill, I told Robert that I wanted to go home as I started to get cold and exhausted. Furthermore, I told him that I did not see us witnessing anything exciting anymore for that night. Robert was disappointed, but nevertheless agreed. Robert wanted us to regularly stop speaking and be completely silent so we could hear everything surrounding us. We also flashed our lights in the woods regularly. This is where it starts to get creepy. As we started to head down the second hill, we started to relax and talk about other interests, as my shrimp posture obliged me to. I more or less only looked at my feet when walking. As we reached the second crosswalk again, Robert suddenly scurried up. In panic, he asked me whether I also saw something jump/hush in the woods coming from the right path to the path we originally came from. As I already mentioned, I looked at my feet when walking down the path, meaning I could not have seen anything. However, I believe that Robert just wanted to build up suspension, as he liked to do that when nothing was happening at our trips. So I did not really believe him in that. He started throwing rocks in the area where said figure seemed to head. We stood still for some minutes, listening for any suspicious sounds, but the forest was in total silence. Realizing this, it made me somewhat uncomfortable. On our way back from the second crossing to the first, we started to ease back down again and started talking normally. The walk back also took about half an hour. This is where it gets really creepy. As we were about to reach the first crossing, I used my flashlight on the trees that were not too far in front of us. As I pointed my light on them, I noticed that there were 2 yellow dots right beside a big tree. As we came closer, I could see it more clearly. These were not just 2 yellow dots. I started to recognize a bald head with these 2 yellow glowing eyes. I told Robert to stand still. I pointed him near the area where that thing was peeking from the tree. I was furious at him because he did not see it. I told him that he needed to focus on the yellow dots. When he recognized it, he freaked out too. I freaked out even more when I thought about our situation. This creature stood between the only near entrance or exit out of the forest and us. We really started to panic as we did not know what to do. As Robert also started to flash on the creature, and we both more or less shouted at ourselves. The creature went behind the tree and peeked out from the other side. As we followed with our lights, it stepped back from the tree. I was able to see more of its body. It was white, gray, hunched over, and its arms were hanging down. It slowly walked away from the crossing, moving one leg, then the other one. We stood on the spot for a few seconds. Then I carefully started to peek in the area it vanished. I couldn't see it anymore. I told Robert to run for his fucking life. And oh boy, even Usain Bolt would have been astonished at our speed in that run. We ran through the exit and went back to my home. It was the scariest experience of my life. What I really found so intriguing about this encounter, this creature either followed or stalked us very quietly through the woods for about half an hour since Robert spotted it on the second crossing till the exit, or it was smart enough to recognize where the path we took would be leading us to, as we first saw it at the second crossing and then in front of us at the exit. It was also able to recognize pretty fast that we spotted it. I think it switched by sides at the twin peak. It wanted to confirm for itself whether we spotted it by seeing us rotate lights to the other side of the tree. I do not think it was scared in the slightest of us, even as I and Robert started to speak more loudly in a stressed voice and calmly just started to walk away. For some backstory, this happened when I was 9 or 10 years old. My parents moved us into a brand new house. We were the first family to live in it. The house always had a dark vibe about it, like the energy was just off. If you were alone in a room, you could feel someone enter, but no one would be there. You could feel a lot of energy. You could never truly be alone with this type of energy. If you were taking a shower, you'd see a shadow in the room with you, walking around through the glass of the shower door. You could be sleeping in the bonus room and wake up to a shadow figure in the doorway. It happened to my parents and myself, but of course my parents played it off as nothing. No one was ever happy in that house. Now that I'm older, whenever I have a nightmare more times than not, it's about the house or the setting is at the house. Now, onto my title. I could probably think of a logical reason for any of the things I talked about above, but not this. I know this really happened. This was not my imagination. When I was young, I always slept in between my parents because I was terrified of the dark one. One night, I shot straight up in bed, and in the doorway, this tall, skinny, glowing gray human-looking thing walked past the doorway into the bonus room. It had no hair. It gave off male energy. Time didn't stand still. There was nothing weird happening other than that fact. I just saw this thing walk past my door. It had no facial features. I was scared when I saw this, but because of the energy it gave off, following this incident, I would always see red glowing eyes in my bedroom closet whenever I'd pass by. I'm 26 now, and I've seen a lot of scary things, but this one always makes me feel the worst when I remember it. What do you guys think that it was? When I was 11, I would hear footsteps on my roof. It was a double wide, and the roof was shingled. It wasn't light steps, as it almost sounded like a person. At first, I thought it was a mountain lion, but after my dad and I went outside after, we both heard it together. There was no trace of such a possibility. Fast forward a few years, and I'm back home with my wife, and she claims that she heard it as well. My mother never said a word for all these years until it was mentioned to my wife. My mother said that it still happened after I left as well. The pattern was infrequent. It would happen for days and then stop for months, and it would happen at any time of the year as well. I did some digging and found that a lot of cancer-related deaths, murder-suicides, and other strange instances happened only in this little part of the area where I lived. This area had about 500 people scattered in clusters around the hidden valleys and woods. I know that land was indigenous people's land for centuries, but I've never found anything to support direct living sites or burials as well. I even dug spots on my parents' property to try and see evidence, but to no avail. Asking around is useful for the old timers, but there's a reason a lot of people just up and move. So, me and a couple of my friends, let's call them E, D, C, S, and G, when exploring this barn last year. It is creepy. We found 2 knives, 1 old working toy, and an attic with some stuff of value. First time, nothing weird, but it gives me the creeps. Next time, last year, start of autumn, my 2 friends, E and D, went to check it out and see what we could do. It didn't go as planned. They saw a white man-like creature in the barn and one outside spying in a bush. They ran for their bikes on the field and watched the creatures do some crazy stuff. I don't know what. Not normal activities. This was like around 2 weeks ago, since I got injured mid-autumn and basically couldn't do anything during winter. We went there to do random shit and mess around like the 13-year-old kids we were. And we searched the barn. Things were a little misplaced. After that, we went to go check out the nearby forest. And it is far outside. We go by the forest and look inside. We hear something. Some gibberish. I don't really know. But we walk in because we are obviously scared and creeped out, and we see some white creatures run around. We ran like 40 meters away and just watched. Something came out and shouted something. Don't know if we should go back and explore or just leave it be. I just posted this, and someone was saying that they saw glowing green eyes when they were 4. I want to know if anybody else has experienced this. So, here's my story. I was around 11 years old and playing at my best friend's house, like we did every week. We were in her bedroom when her mom called upstairs that my mom was there to pick me up. We stood in front of the mirror next to the door. Between the door and the mirror was the light switch. I switched it off so that we could go downstairs, and then we both saw 2 glowing green, almond-shaped eyes between us in the mirror. I know how that sounds, but it was really what we saw. We both screamed and ran downstairs as fast as we could. We were so scared. Our moms didn't really believe us, and we didn't do anything with it afterwards. After school, we grew apart, but I saw her a few years later and asked her if she remembered and had any idea what it was. She remembered and had no idea. I still think about it sometimes, and I just really want to know what it was. The room was pitch black. There was no one else there, and nothing I can think of that could have been. I would love to hear if anybody else has had this type of experience before. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 14. I'm not sure what reminded me of this experience, but I thought I'd share it here. It was a Sunday night around 7 p.m. or so, and I was at my church's West Campus for youth group. At youth group, we would often play hide and seek at the end of the night while we waited for our parents to come pick us up. We always really enjoyed it because the West Campus had a lot of dark rooms in the basement to hide in. One room in particular was the costume room. The costume room was one of the last in the hallway and had 2 doors you could enter in from. One door was always locked though, for whatever reason. The doors were about 6 to 8 feet away from each other, so if you picked the locked door, you could get to the unlocked one pretty fast. Something else about the costume room that is very cluttered. There are racks upon racks of clothing and different props everywhere. As you can imagine, the room had a lot of places where you could hide easily. On this Sunday, we finished early, so we had about 30 minutes of play hide and seek, which we were all stoked about. And so, the game began. We all quickly dispersed into the mini rooms of the West Campus. As I ran down the hallway, many of the kids picked the closest rooms to hide in, which is also what I normally did, but everyone had to beat me to those rooms and I didn't want to hide with a bunch of other people. So I ran to the end of the hallway, to the costume room. The first door was locked, so I went to the second one and entered the dark room. Once I was inside, I hurried through all of the clothing racks and made my way to the back and hid behind some props. As I was hiding, I could hear doors opening and closing and walking around outside in the hall. I was so focused on those sounds that I almost didn't notice the sound of shuffling on the other side of the room. My first thought was that maybe someone else had gotten in here to hide before I did, so I whispered very quietly, "Hey, who else is in here?" I got no reply. My second thought was that there was probably a mouse or some kind of animal in there that was moving around. That was until some costumes on the rack had fallen down. At this point, my heart is racing. I started to think that someone was trying to scare me, and frankly, it was working. I whispered again, "Please, who's in there? This isn't funny." Again, I got no reply. I worked up some courage and decided to slowly make my way over to the other side of the room to find who was trying to prank me. When I had gotten to the rack where the clothes had fallen from, there was no one there. I picked the clothes off the floor and hung them back up because I was just going to hide there now because I didn't want to move again and get caught by the seeker. By this time, I had been hiding for maybe 5-7 minutes at most. Then suddenly, someone started knocking on the door. When I tell you I nearly jumped out of my skin. At the same time the knocking happened, the props I had originally hid behind tumbled to the floor. I about had a heart attack. The knocking stopped. The sound that took its place was the sound of both door handles being wiggled, followed by, "Is someone in there?" I popped up out of my spot and ran to the door. It was locked. I ran to the other door. It was locked. And the thing about this is that there was only one key to unlock the doors, and the person who had it was not there that night, so how the hell did the unlocked door I had entered through magically become locked? By now, I'm screaming and banging on the door with tears rolling down my cheeks. "Stop holding the door shut," my youth pastor yelled. I'm not holding it," I screamed at the top of my lungs. Then to put the cherry on top, an entire rack fell over, like not just the clothes on it, the whole rack. If I wasn't freaking the hell out yet, I definitely was now. I ran over to check the other door again, and now it was unlocked. So, you bet your sweet ass, I ran as fast as I could, right past my youth pastor and friends, right up to the stairs and into the bathroom. About 2 minutes later, my friends followed me into the bathroom and asked me what had been so funny. "We heard you laughing down there. And why did you break those props?" They heard laughing coming from the room I was in, but I didn't hear laughing. And I definitely wasn't laughing in there. I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me.
They thought I had planned this whole story to try and scare them. I don't know what else was in that room with me that night, but by the sound of it, it got a good laugh scaring the shit out of me. Mildly spooky, and this actually just happened. My friends and I are on our way from Chicago back to our home in Evansville. As such, we have to drive through the Midwestern country to get there. Pitch black highways, surrounded by trees and cornfields. About 4 hours away from home, my friend screams, and I look up. We hit a deer going 50. The poor guy bounces off the front end and is probably dead on impact. We come to a stop and commiserate, call our parents. We're stranded on a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere, trees to our right and a few houses a bit far off to our left. My friend is standing outside, surveying the damage when we hear a scream. A man's scream. A bit far off to our left. My other friend and I took a look at each other, wide-eyed. A few minutes pass, and we hear one again. I make a joke about skinwalkers, and my friend gets back into the car. A bit later, after calling 911, we hear another scream. A woman this time, and it seems closer. We're waiting on the deputy and nervously joking about whether it's skinwalkers or crazy elderly people with sundowners and a lava visit. And my friend, facing the trees, suddenly laughs nervously and rolls up the window. I just heard clicking noises outside my window. And I'm rolling it up because I'm not going to pretend I didn't just hear them. Anyway, now we're back on our way and out of Skinwalker country or whatever the fuck it was. It was just something really spooky that happened and I figured I'd share it. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support. I hope you enjoy the stories as much as I did reading them.